Hello and welcome to My Cyber Why. This is the show where we talk to people from around the world about the amazing things that they're doing every day to keep us and our digital assets safe online. Today's guest is Debbie Taylor Moore, who is currently a partner at Cyber Energy Partners, where she works with oil and gas companies to help them develop and build out their cybersecurity programs. Welcome, Debbie.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it, Diana. Great to be here.
So glad that you're here. Okay, so let's start out. Who's Debbie?
So, I am a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a friend, I'm a sister, daughter. I'm someone who enjoys a lot of the girly things, although I live in a house full of guys. I have two sons and a terrific husband. I like I like special events and galas, and I collect hats. I like tablescapes. I like dress up parties and all that sort of fun stuff. And we have two terrific boys who, although they have super STEM and finance backgrounds, they chose the arts, which is really interesting.
Okay.
I have a son who is an aspiring animator, and I have a son who works for Wilhelmina Models, and he does modeling in sports and leisure. So he works for like Amazon and for Levi's, Old Navy, NBA, NFL, those brands. And so in my spare time, I'm also a momager. I help him a little bit with his
of your model son. And so here's a bonus question: do fascinators count as hats?
Yes, they do. And they are becoming more and more popular, actually, because, everybody looks good in a fascinator.
I think so. I think you're right.
Everyone does, yes.
Hats can be tricky, but fascinators are a little, easier to pull off.
They are easier to pull off, definitely.
And what is it that you're doing right now with Cyber Energy Partners? And you've also founded Zephyr Partners too. So
Cyber Zephyr, yes.
Yeah, Cyber Zephyr.
Yeah, absolutely. So, with Cyber Zephyr, which is what I've been doing for the bulk of time in the cyber industry, as you know, I'm a cyber veteran. I've been around for about 17 years. And when I initially started in the industry, I actually was a software sales leader, for lack of a better way to describe it. And I worked for companies like IBM. I worked for Microsoft. And it was at Microsoft that really was the impetus to get me into cybersecurity 17 years ago. I worked with clients who, back then, we were experiencing SQL Slammer, Red Nimda, a lot of sort of serious takedown type viruses and worms. And we didn't have really partners in our ecosystem to address remediation or any sort of forensics, cyber forensics or incident response back then. And so we were struggling because we really didn't have a plan, and customers were down for days and days. And so I looked very purposefully for a cyber company that might be able to help, but also might be in the space, because I thought, this is incredible. Our software is so ubiquitous. People were all having the same problems. There seems to be an industry that's being created here. And so I went about starting to work with a managed security service provider back then, and worked with customers of every stripe. Today, I work with companies and investors, and I also work with buyers, people who are buying and acquiring cybersecurity technologies. With the investors, I help them sort of separate the wheat from the chaff and understand where their money should be going, and help them save millions and millions of dollars not investing in cyber solutions that aren't going to be good investments. With buyers, I help them sort of do the same thing. I help them really look at solutions that fit nicely into their environment, certainly, but also take into account the legacy acquisitions that they've already made, and all of the integration requirements that need to be met. And I help them to not just go running after the bright, shiny new object that's out there, because there's a new company every day.
Yeah.
And then some of those companies, those early stage companies, as well as companies that are a bit mature, that have solutions that they're trying to bring to market, I help them to optimize their ability to work with one and two, the investors as well as the buyers, the potential buyers. And what we're finding in our industry right now is that there's just so much saturation. And in order to really sort of sort through that, I mean, it's a full-time job if you're a CISO, for instance.
Yeah.
You know, it's not something that it's not something that's easily done. For a lot of these folks, they are absolute kingmakers when it comes to picking a solution and perhaps helping the trajectory of a new to industry company. But at the same time, they sit on the front line and they have such risk with what they do select. And so I've been a trusted advisor for many years because I have the ability to sort of understand the legacy environments that people have, as well as the new technology, staying on top of those.
And it
And so
sounds
that,
like, I'm sorry. It sounds like that it's a really nice balance too, being able to go out and talk to customers so you understand, on the ground what people are doing. And then does that help really inform as you advise the VCs on, hey, this is useful or not, because you know that you were out talking to the people implementing.
absolutely. I mean, and that's really key because a lot of the investors that I work with, I mean, they could easily find themselves in sort of, being deck and demo meisters at looking at all these companies and, looking at them more or less on paper and not really understanding from an operational standpoint whose solution out there is working, but also what's important in terms of trends and, solutions that are probably maybe there are quite a few more of them on the market that need to be, that aren't necessarily solving new problems. And that's kind of the key, is to solving new problems. We're not really looking for incrementalism. Like we have a million endpoint protection or, endpoint detection and response solutions, but are they bringing something new to the table to help with the emerging threat is kind of key. And so helping those folks and doing the diligence is really important, because a lot of times with investors, they get very involved in deal flow and very involved in what's happening from a media perspective with, the hype about what's out there and what's new versus, where it really fits into actual environments.
Yeah, one of my favorite things early on was when I was a consultant was a CEO said, "Get me the internet." I was like, what do you mean? It's like they had heard on the golf course they needed the internet, and I was like, okay, let's talk that through. What that means.
Hold on 1 minute. I'll go get that for you.
Right. Oh, it's right here.
Exactly.
So you mentioned SQL Slammer was how you got really sort of excited about IT and about cyber and how getting people prepared for responses. What keeps you going? That got you into the field. What's your cyber why? When you wake up in the morning and you get really excited, what is it that you're excited to go and do?
That's a great question. I think that this idea of the evolving nature of the cyber threat and the fact that the threat actors and adversaries just keep coming and they just become more and more clever, and there are always going to be new threat vectors, new ways of approaching methodologies, standards, all of it. Like the industry just changes so much. Like it's never a dull moment. I like that part, but I also like that with the folks that I work with, whether it's investors or it's early stage folks or it's buyers, speaking truth to power is a really important thing in our industry. It's super important, because what I don't want to see happen, which some would argue we're on the cusp of, is the commoditization of the cyber industry. I think that there's so much work left to be done that in a lot of ways the industry's become a bit of a gold rush. In some respects, there are a lot of companies that are having iconic exits that, and deservedly so. And so what
Yeah.
it does is it draws in folks that, have an idea that maybe
Yeah.
is just a standalone idea, but not one that would really be a program or a platform that replaces or improves something that's already there. And so all of that confusion becomes like just noise for people who have to make decisions. So I like sort of clearing the noise, sort of
Yeah.
narrowing it down for them, helping them to helping them with the right decision support, but helping them to get to become rapidly educated on how they
Mm.
should approach their decision making.
Being a truth teller so
Yeah,
that people can, yeah, differentiate the glittery, the bright shiny object from the actual implementable technology. That's great. And we need more of that, because I think even on the end side, even if with the investors, because VCs, they know some of their companies will hit and some won't. But
yeah,
having been an implementer in my day, you don't want to waste time with a product that's just not going to deliver on the
absolutely.
promise. So it's so important to have people helping the VCs and the companies understand what's going to work and what won't.
Absolutely. And in my position, I've sat in all three seats. I've invested as a friends
Yeah.
and family investor in companies. I've been a buyer from the standpoint of being an executive leader and trying to select solutions for companies.
Yeah.
And I've also been a seller. The first 19 years or so of my career, I actually spent out there selling, IBM's portfolio, Microsoft's portfolio, and that piece of it gives me a lot of empathy for all sides. And you see where the gaps are.
Yeah.
You're just thinking, if we could just work together a little more and we could fill those gaps, we get there faster in terms of sort of solving some of the bigger challenges that cybersecurity brings to the marketplace. And I
Yeah.
think that, when you look at what we have in front of us, I mean, it's really become the industry has become not only very crowded, but there's so much activity. And
Mm.
these folks that have to be on the front lines really don't get the reward that people on the financial end of things sometimes see. And a lot of, but they get all the risk. And
Mm.
so, in a lot of ways, I help people, whether it's a board or somebody helping them to get, money and or fundraising for acquisitions that they need to make for their organization, or whether it's someone trying to get funding for an early stage company. They have a great idea and they're going out there and they're trying to bring it to the marketplace, but they're, that becomes tougher and tougher because the competition is great. We have 2,500 or so companies that are actually product companies today,
Yeah.
and that's a ton of noise. And I think that, my best advice really for anybody who is in the space that is trying to sell a product out there is to be authentic and
Mm.
to be authentic, be honest. If you're coming to the market with a minimally viable product, a customer may be very excited to go along with you for the ride if it's innovative enough. But be honest about where you are. The same thing with an investor. If you're talking to an investor about where you are, the honesty goes a really long way, because they understand not only where you are, but where you're trying to head and why you might need that funding. And so that's something that, as the stakes get higher, it becomes harder to achieve the level of trust, trustworthiness, and honesty in the space.
Yeah, that is a great point. Yeah, it's because I think a lot of startups, they sometimes feel that they need to kind of puff themselves up and really make it sound. And I completely agree with you that authenticity really matters. And a lot of times with your design partners, if they understand that they're going with you on that journey and it's not a fully baked product yet, that can be a good thing, because then they become your extended team instead of having an angry customer saying this didn't work the way I wanted it.
Exactly, exactly. And also, it's
Yeah.
helpful to the um, company or the tech founder if they're going forward and they're not just necessarily approaching audiences where they're selling to friendlies or people that they've known forever. It's not a good case study for product market fit. It's not a
Mm.
true opportunity to test your product out in the marketplace. And sometimes, companies can go out there a little bit more inflated than they actually are. And it's just not good to fool Mother Nature. You
Right.
gotta, you have to,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
have to be able to withstand the tests and rigors of a true pilot. And I think on the side of people who are CISOs or CEOs that are or strategic buyers, when they're looking at acquiring a solution, a lot of times they get very comfortable with the advisors or people on the ground that they've always worked with. And so they're always getting their advice from one or two places and maybe not applying the rigor to more innovative, very new technologies and
Yeah.
solutions because they're living in the safety comfort zone or,
Mm.
or no risk zone of listening to folks they've always listened to. So I help
Yeah.
new technologies and innovation get sort of past that barrier as well.
Yeah, that's very cool. And it's true. It's right. And sometimes you can get into that mindset of that's not the way we've done it. We've always done it this other way. I have to catch myself because I'll be thinking, oh, it's not done that way. And it's like, well, the technology has shifted. The landscape has shifted. Let's reassess those assumptions and think again.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, how would you like people to, as they're listening to this, if there's a piece of advice that you give listeners or maybe something, a recommendation on a book to read, how do you think people can get more involved or more educated about the kinds of work that you do and staying safe online?
Well, I think that there are a couple of things. I think that, and I will address all three groups. So I want to mention a book. I'm
Okay.
glad you mentioned it. The Security Yearbook 2020.
Okay.
This book was just released, and it's funny because it sort of squashes the idea of what is a security product company, the whole dilemma that we face in our industry about, oh, there's 5,000 companies out there, or there's 4,000. The researcher in this book, Richard Stedman, actually did the research and went and found and enumerated in a directory all of the viable security companies that are out there today. So that's a little bit of separating the wheat from the chaff. And
Yeah.
I was very fortunate to be featured in that as part
Yeah.
of the IT security history, because it is an IT security history and directory. So that's a book. That's a book to grab.
Good
And I
advice.
would say to investors that don't get so involved in the deal flow that you're afraid to you know examine maybe there are certain technologies or certain areas or subsectors of cybersecurity that you're not completely proficient on or not completely comfortable. Bring in an advisor or an expert to help you sort of discern what's good out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then for the buyers, so when I say buyers, I mean people who are in strategic companies that are buying technologies to complement their existing environments, and or people that are strategically trying to further develop their portfolio of cyber companies. Talk to your friends, talk to your peers, talk to people who are in your vertical. If you're in commercial industry, if you're in federal government, talk to folks and see what works and what they're using, and keep those lines of communication open, because I know we have a lot of information security organizations where that kind of information sharing can happen, but there's nothing better than talking to somebody that you trust in the industry and get a few opinions. And then for the folks that are bringing new technologies to the marketplace, I would say pay attention to the landscape, because a lot of times folks get so involved in what they're developing and so myopic about it that by the time they bring the thing to market, it's not kept up with the threat, and
Yeah.
it's not kept up with market needs and requirements, and it can be rendered obsolete by the time you actually are fully bringing it to market. So I would say look around you all the time, understand the security landscape, and don't be afraid to explore the things that maybe you are not real comfortable with, and test those things out with the fullest rigor possible with actual customers versus
Yeah.
just in the lab, so to speak.
Yeah, it's such great advice because it's true. Founders can really get it because they've had this great vision, but sometimes that vision may need to pivot, and it certainly needs to get tested out in the real world and in the field to make sure that vision is going to deliver, in reality.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think too for founders, a lot of times they have a lot of great meetings and a lot of people who
Mm.
want to encourage them along, and they can mistake a great meeting for or great meetings for market traction. And so it's not really real until you're really bringing in revenue. And sometimes you need assistance with that to be able to find a trusted party to work with and a trusted party to fully test out your solution and help you to bring it to market.
Yeah, it's interesting. The other thing I've seen with startups, and I'm curious what you've seen, is that sometimes they'll get one big customer and essentially they design the product for their use case. And the founder may feel like, oh, this is now going to, fit every one of those verticals, whether it's oil and gas or whether but it was really for that one company. I don't know if you see that a
Oh,
lot. Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, like that's the biggest question of all. I think the biggest question that founders have to always answer is what problem am I solving?
Mm,
And unfortunately, like those problems don't always replicate themselves to other customers. And that's why that piece is critical because I see a lot of products that come to market and they're looking for a use case.
ah,
They think it's a great idea. It's something that made sense to them, but they're out there looking to apply a use case.
yeah,
Hammer looking for,
yeah.
a set of nails. And so,
Looking for a nail. Yeah.
yeah, and that's an expensive endeavor, what you described. The idea of developing something and customizing, a lot of times you see people customizing their solution for every single customer in order to grab the big logos. And they end up having a real hard time sort of creating a solution that works broadly across the marketplace.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where somebody like you can really help them focus on
Oh,
solve
yeah.
the problem, not just, yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And also looking at trends. I mean, I think that a lot of times, and I know we see this a lot, like in spaces like the threat intelligence space, where
Mm,
someone has worked really hard to develop sort of a standalone solution when people are putting that component into all sorts of other platforms, whether that's a SIM or EDR or wherever it is, they're putting threat intelligence as a component into that, and it ends up being somewhat commoditized and everyone's sharing the same feeds. It's very hard to differentiate yourself unless you have something super unique from a platform perspective, or you're offering something that is usually maybe from the human perspective in terms of analysts and people who have special threat hunting skills. And
yeah.
for many companies, they come to the table sometimes and they've got their eyes set on working with enterprise customers, the
Mm,
largest Fortune 50 customers. And that is extremely tough. Those are
that's
complex
true.
environments,
Yeah.
but it's an extremely tough way to go in terms of longer sales cycles and adoption, but
Yeah.
also the whole idea that you're going to integrate your solution into their existing environment. You've got to understand what they've got there from a legacy standpoint. They're not going to throw everything out in order to bring in what you have.
Yeah,
So
much as we'd like, yeah, so to go greenfield all the way, yeah, there's a legacy and they have constraints. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. And I would say the same is true for mid-market or SMB. You're not going to have the average transaction size that you might need to show real significant revenue progress with very small entities. They have sometimes very specific needs, but also very little dollars sometimes to actually support the effort that you're
Yeah.
you're making in those marketplaces as well. So there's a lot that goes into going to market in cyber, but I think that more than anything, it's such a moving target because the threat is always changing, and staying on top of emerging technologies is actually like that's a super cool, fun part of
Yeah.
all of it, certainly. But it's really hard when you're building something to anticipate, what's coming down the pike in terms of emerging threat. So that's a challenge for everyone, sort of looking into the future and sort of figuring out what's going to have value in the future, whether that's technical value or whether that's financial value or just what to expect.
Well, thank you for the work that you do with the founders and with the VCs, making sure that we nurture new ideas to market in a way that's going to be effective and helping to get them funded. So thank you so much for that work to help keep us all safe. And thank you so much for being on My Cyber Why and sharing your inspiration with us.
Thanks for having me. It's always wonderful to speak with you, Diana.
You too. Thank you, Debbie. And thanks everybody that listened in. This has been My Cyber Why.